Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. Just when you thought that 2020 couldn't get any stranger, this year got the surprise twist it deserves. Kanye West has announced that he's running for president. And no, that's not some kind of weird metaphor, he really did. Or at least he kind of did, it's complicated. Oh, and if this whole thing wasn't confusing enough already, Elon Musk decided to get involved. So today, let's take a look at this surprise entrance into the already strange dumpster fire that is the 2020 race for president. If you're interested in the 2020 election, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more updates and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post. We also have a whole series on the topic where we discuss the events leading up to November 3rd, State of the Election. You can find a link to that series at the top of the description. Thanks for your support. So, first things first, what happened? Well, basically, on Saturday, Kanye tweeted, "We must now realise the promise of America by trusting God, unifying our vision, and building our future. I am running for President of the United States." SpaceX and Tesla founder and discount Iron Man Elon Musk tweeted in response, "You have my full support." Twitter, needless to say, collectively lost its mind. But before we get into the actual politics and realities of this, let's just say that it's entirely likely that this is just a weird publicity stunt. Maybe he's releasing a new album called 2020 Vision. Maybe he's still just annoyed that his plain white t-shirts didn't sell that well. Maybe he's just doing some other Kanye thing. Who knows? But for the sake of simplicity, let's operate as if he's serious about this. If it turns out he's not, lovely. We can all just add it to the list of the weird things that happened in this fever dream of a year. In the meantime though, and I can't believe I'm saying this, let's look at the politics of Kanye West's presidential run. One of the first issues raised by many political figures on Twitter was the filing of deadlines, which, while sounding incredibly boring, is actually an incredibly important part of the election. Basically, they're the deadlines by which a candidate has to apply to get on a state's ballot. And since Kanye is entering far too late to have any reasonable chance of unseating Trump or Biden from their positions as nominees of their respective parties, he'll presumably have to run as an independent. The filing deadlines for the general election vary by state, but in 6 states, registration deadlines have already passed. Those being Indiana, Maine, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, and Texas. 6 states might not seem like a lot, but together they amount to 102 electoral votes out of 538. Obviously, not a great start to his campaign. Of course, on the other hand, that still leaves 436 votes on the table that Kanye could theoretically win, but those aren't going to be easy picking either. Many of the remaining states have filing deadlines that are rapidly approaching, and since we're only 3 months out for the election, Kanye would have to work incredibly quickly for even the most remote chance of winning anything. All of this is compounded by the fact that, as far as anyone can tell, Kanye doesn't seem to have any sort of campaign team. He also never announced an exploratory committee, something which most candidates form early on to examine whether or not people would be receptive to them running. Instead, Kanye's 4th of July announcement seems to have been almost impulsive. This, however, is not to say that the rapper doesn't have a history of threatening presidential runs. Over the years, he's openly talked about wanting to run for president, and earlier in this year, even said that he'd vote for President Trump in November. So what's changed in the months between now and then? Well, who knows? Whatever it was though, it's unlikely to be enough to get him elected. And this is the point where it becomes pertinent to talk about the reality of independents running for president. Basically, it doesn't work. Only one independent in American history has held the office of president. That was George Washington, and even that could be chalked up to default, since he assumed the presidency before the US even had political parties. But now the US most certainly does have political parties, and they have absolute domination over the electoral system. And not all political parties are created equal. The domination is not held proportionally across the party spectrum, and is held almost entirely by 2 major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. We'll make a more in-depth video about third parties at a later time, but to summarise the situation, The two major parties, by the way of the electoral system used in the US, leave essentially no opportunity for a third party or independent candidate to gain office, especially at the presidential level. Basically, any independent or third party candidate is forced to start from square one, with no assumptions about who they are or who will vote for them. Meanwhile, Republicans and Democrats get to start from a place of assuming that they'll get a significant share of the vote. Democrats, for example, don't have to worry about California swinging red, or at least not anytime soon. And Republicans probably don't have to panic about losing a state like Wyoming in the next few years. Kanye West, however, has no expected base and a grand total of 0 states that are reliably Kanye. So while Trump and Biden battle it out over a few select swing states, Kanye will have to work across the board. This process is only made more difficult for third parties and independents by the existence of the Electoral College. This is because, with the exceptions of Maine and Nebraska, every state works on a winner-takes-all system in the Electoral College. So even if the candidate only wins a simple majority of the vote in the state, they win 100% of the Electoral College votes that state holds. This disparity is highlighted by the emergence of prominent third parties or independents. As in a three-way race, one only needs a plurality to win all of the state's electoral votes. And this isn't just a theoretical situation. There are numerous elections throughout American history where an independent or third-party candidate got the short end of the stick in the Electoral College. But the most prominent example of this in recent history was the election of 1992, in which independent Ross Perot took on Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton and incumbent President George H.W. Bush. In the popular vote, Bill Clinton won approximately 45 million votes. Bush won 39 million, and Perot won about 20 million. If the Electoral College was proportional to the popular vote, Perot would have been awarded somewhere in the range of 100 electors. But it's not, and Perot won, wait for it, 0. Clinton, meanwhile, who won only around 45% of the popular vote, was elected with 370 electoral votes, a whole 100 votes above the 270 needed to win. Needless to say, running as an independent isn't exactly an easy feat. It is, however, a phenomenal way of screwing over the major party candidate with whom you most agree. Why? Well, because of vote splitting. If you don't already spend far too much time thinking about the potential ways in which the vote could be split in any given election, here's a basic rundown of how vote splitting in a modern election could work. Let's say each of the two major parties has exactly 50% of the American electorate who agree with them. In that situation, Electoral College excluded, the vote would be tied. But if, say, another prominent conservative entered the race as a libertarian or independent, the Republican vote could be split, meaning that we end up with a final result of, say, 25% independent, 25% Republican, and 50% Democrat, which would give said Democrat a comfortable plurality and land them in the White House. Obviously, the real world is more complicated than this, but the basic idea is still there. In fact, some would argue that this is what doomed Hillary in 2016. In the crucial swing state of Michigan, for example, Clinton lost to Trump by only around 10,000 votes. Meanwhile, Green Party candidate Jill Stein won around 50,000 votes. And considering it's unlikely that many of those Green votes would have gone for Trump, it's reasonable to say that had Stein not been as prominent as she was, Clinton could have won Michigan and beyond. Because of all this, the entrance of any prominent independent or third-party candidate into the race usually sends Democratic and Republican leaders into full panic mode. Going back to the situation at hand though, we find ourselves at an interestingly unique situation. That's because, well, Kanye doesn't have a platform or a base. Obviously, he may develop both of these as the election goes on, but for now, he's looking quite lacking there. And even if he does put out a platform in the coming weeks, it's unlikely to show us whether it will take more votes from Biden or Trump. And this is because, politically, Kanye is a unique character. He's a somewhat young African-American musician, so he could be expected to take a large chunk of the youth vote from Biden, and possibly a percentage of the African American vote too. At the same time, his political views have tended to line up more closely with those of Trump, and he did endorse him earlier on after all, so one could reasonably expect that he'll take at least a few votes from Trump. So who would he pull more votes from? Well, who knows at this point. But it's worth putting it out there that by virtue of having a base in rural America, Trump has a default electoral college advantage, as voters in rural states have more power than those in dense cities and states. This has led to some speculation that Kanye's entrance is a stunt meant to pull enough votes from Biden to get Trump over the finish line. This is obviously just speculation, and for now, we'll just have to sit and wait for more of this political train wreck to play itself out. In the meantime, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post a new video on this absolute madness. Also, check out our series State of the Election for more updates on the 2020 campaigns. The whole playlist can be found in the description.